Hey everyone, Sim for the Future here, and thanks for checking out my Loopop Superbooth 2021 contest submission. So in this contest, Loopop asked if we could do a little show and tell about the track we made. So I figured I would just do one of the things I usually do, a little breakdown and maybe a bit of a tutorial about how I got to this track and the kind of effects I have used. So I wanted to stick very, very close to the rules. One of the rules being that the only sound sources allowed are the samples provided by Loopop. And also you cannot use any paid VSTs unless you have a very good reason for this. So I wanted to go just one step beyond, and I thought, well, maybe I can do this using only free VSTs and using a DAW that is essentially free, if you don't mind clicking the little registration box away. So in essence, you could do this entire track just with all the free stuff he provided and all the free VSTs I will show off in this video. Now there are two exceptions, kind of, maybe three. First off, I have used Melodyne on the vocals, but that's just because I'm a very shitty vocalist. Now, it doesn't really matter for a vocoder, but I have to show off the unvocoded tracks, and to save myself some embarrassment, I decided to Melodyne them. Totally optional, of course. The other effect I use here is ozone, ozonate elements, but it's also bypassed. It is only for the imager, because I quite like the vector scope and the correlation tool here. I am not actually using any of the things in the mixer. You could also use the built-in tools by Reaper, but I just kind of prefer this view. And another small exception, I didn't really use the VST itself, but I pulled some MIDI files from Addictive Drums, basically because I was lazy, and they have a very nice library. All the beats are pretty simple though, so you could easily play them on a drum kit if you wanted to, or on pads. Totally up to you. Anyways, enough exceptions, so let's talk a little bit about this track, and I will talk about this track in the order in which I made it. Oh, maybe one more thing to note. I am using the full version of Kontakt. That's mostly because I don't have Kontakt Player installed. I'm not using any of the Kontakt features themselves. They are just the Loopop instruments, and that's it. Just to get that straight. So let's start at the top. First thing I thought about was drums. My initial plan was to look into something maybe synthwavy, vaporwave, something like that. So I figured I would need some drums, which sound something along those lines. Turns out that's not really in our selection. I'm just turning off these because these are causing some latency, which is a bit annoying with playback. It's just the limiter and the maximizer. So this is our drum bus. Let's go to a bit that isn't automated. As you can see, there's quite a bit of stacking going on here. I use the, let's go from bass up. Contract instrument, Rabbit Elephant Portal drums, a little bit of wave shaper distortion, and a little bit of equalizer. Now you will see a lot of the Melda plugins, and that's because Melda has a free bundle of absolutely amazing plugins, which are highly recommended. So if you need to do something for free, definitely check those out. If you have the free version, it will have a little banner here that says, this is the free version. And if you pay, that banner goes away. That's essentially the difference between the free and the paid version. So this is something you can totally do in the free version. Just to boost the low end a little bit. Not much going on there. Hats. So we're using the 6M0D6 from the sample pack, which has an open and a close hat, which was exactly what I needed, with a little bit of convolution reverb. Also free from Melda. This makes it sound a little bit bigger, and then we get to the snare, which is actually interesting. Now, the snare is very tricky because I was essentially thinking I would do the synthwave thing with the huge gated snare thing. But the samples are not really that useful for that kind of music, and there's also a little rule there that says you can't tamper too much with the sample, so I figured let's not try that. I basically split the snare sound up into a lower and a higher part. Let's do the lower first. So this is our same kit. Convolution, compressor, and a pitch shifter. It's a built-in Reaper effect, which pitch shifts it down a little bit for semitones, just to add a little bit more body to the snare. And then we have a higher, which is pretty much the same thing. Exact same snare sample, going from a convolution, going into a compressor. It's pretty minor, just helps it cut a little bit more. So that's our drum parts, and these are fed into a bus. And this is where some more fun happens. So this little plugin is definitely something I'm going to cover very soon in a full review video, because this is amazing. Buffer override by DestroyFX, recently updated to 46 bits. So very feasible to use. It's a buffer effect, which I'm using in this intro bit to create the stutters with the automation here. Very cool. It allows you to set some buffer sizes and some buffer cutting. It's a very cool little thing. And it's free, which is pretty amazing. And it looks like it's from the 90s because it's from the 90s. After that, we get Crush by Tritic, something like that. It's a bit crusher plugin just to add a little bit more filth to the entire bus. It's a little minor thing. Once again, run into a compressor just to squeeze every little bit of dynamics out of this thing where possible. And this is mostly there because I was having some transient problems with the buffer override that would spike every so often, so it's set very high. It just catches off some very small little clippings here and there. So that's our little drum track. Then we get into the toms, which are used every so often. Now, initially I wanted these to become very, very big synthwave 80s toms, but I could resist myself. So we kept it rather small. Contact, once again, same kit, 6M OD6. We're here somewhere. Going into a convolution. Going into a compressor / expander. So this little bit is expanding, and here it's compressing. And this is mostly to catch the tail of the convolution, so it doesn't ring out too long. Once again, it's a pretty minor little thing. Sounds pretty dinky without. It's better. And just adds a little bit of loudness. So that's basically our toms. So that was the first part I made. I think it would be just nice and cliche to have the little filter intro. And the next thing that I made was the bass. So we're going to skip percussion, we're going straight to bass. Now this was a little bit of a challenge because I couldn't quite get the right sound, but I think this is pretty good. Let's go here for a second. So I did a little bit of a split here, which I will show in a second. For this we are using this crossover by RS-Matt. Basically the only reason I use this is because someone in, I think it was Josh in the Unfiltered Audio Discord, who mentioned that this was one of the plugins that inspired one of their earlier plugins, and I was like, well, it's free, let's just toss it in there. This does some band splitting. It takes the lower frequencies, sends it to the low bus, and it takes the higher frequencies, and those go to the high bus. So we have here two lanes. Here's just a splitter. And we have the Arp. They are both the same patch, essentially the Arp and the non-Arp. The difference being blue Arp, which is a free arpeggiator, living on the Arp. Going into the contact, it's the Hydrosyn 2. Going into Melda Wave folder, also part of the free pack. Going into Crush because you can't make things nasty enough. And we also have a non-ARP version, which pops up a little bit later in the track. Contact Wave folder, Crush. And that's just to add a little bit more nastiness to it, because I thought it was still a little bit tame. Got to make it a little bit heavy, right? So that's our bass. I figured it would be nice to just do this. Arpeggiated bass thing. Let's move further down the line. We get into the arpeggiators. Once again, Blue Arp for the arpeggios. Blue Arp, by the way, is a very powerful tool. Not just an arpeggiator. You can do sequences and all sorts of cool stuff in it. I just used it for the arpeggiator. And Blue Arp basically splits up the MIDI, so you don't have to either play it out or write it in. It's just a nice bit of convenience, and it's free. So there you go. This is the Loopop Udo 6 bell and tail convolution, and a lo-fi delay, which is built into Reaper. Just to add a bit more character. So if you don't use Blue Arp, it's just this. It's very dry. It's better. Just adds a little bit more character. That's our first ARP, and to offset it a little bit, I did a second ARP, which is going the exact opposite way. So this ARP is going up, and this ARP is going down. So if you put them together, you have one line going up, one line going down. This sounds a little bit more interesting. Blue Arp, once again, contact. So this is Waldorf M5 going into convolution reverb. And here's this nice little thing that's called General Dynamics. It's a bit of a silly name. Yeah. I actually don't think I'm really using this anymore. Not really. I think I initially used this as a way to shave off the tail. Yeah, it seems to be basically off. So ignore this. After the ARP sections, which are just copy-paste in two places. Nothing very exciting. We get into the lead sounds. Now here we had to do a little bit more magic to get the right effect. So we're using two leads. It's much the same trick as before, by the way. Utility here is used to add a little bit extra width, I think. Yep, and a chorus. This adds a bit. We have two lead sounds. So there's a bit more tinkering going on here. Here you can nicely see the expander and the compressor working together. It's the Loopop Nymphs 6 wait for it sound. Going into, obviously, convolution reverb. Well, ideally I would have used something like Vintage Verb or something, which I used to start with, but I figured I just want to use free stuff. And the first reverb I came across was the M Convolution EZ, which is free, which has some impulses built in. So I figured, well, why not? I did eventually find another reverb, which was free as well. I just stuck to this because it sounds kind of alright. And here we have And this just drags out the tail a little bit at the end of the sentences. Because the release is a little bit short for my taste for this kind of solo thing, this adds quite a bit of extra release without having to tweak the sample, and it's a built-in effect from Reaper, so that should still be okay. This is bent slightly left and slightly right. We have the lead double. So you can hear it's quite soft. It's basically more of the same thing. Names 6, wait for it, going into a convolution, general dynamics with the compressor, and here the inverted compressor. Going into utility for a little bit of extra stereo width and to swap the left and right channel to add a little bit of extra interest. This is just to add a little bit of low end to this solo sound because it's already pretty pitchy. Just fills it in a little bit. I think it's a pretty nice touch. It does help with the overall sound. So this is tuned down 1 octave, and that's it. Nothing else done to it at all. Solo sound comes back here. It's the exact same sound, zero automation, very straightforward stuff. Then we need to move down a little bit. We get to the Pluckers. So this is a later addition because I felt like just the vocal lines was a little bit empty, so I wanted to add a little bit of extra sass to it. Came to this sound. So this is pretty buried in the track. If you add the vocals, and this is still the scratch vocal patch, I will add in the right vocals later on. It's just a little bit of extra ear candy there. I don't think this is a very interesting thing to look at as well. Nope, very much the same thing. It's the Uda bell and tail. Going into the comb filter. Comb, also in the free pack. Just makes it sound a little bit more belly actually. A reverb, obviously. Very big reverb. Probably would have been smart to cut out a little bit of low end in this, but hey, too late for that now. After that, actually we're going to save the bed for now. We have some FX to talk about. And these effects. I really like this one, it's kind of wheel-like. So what do we have going on here? It's the Doopfer 126-2. Obviously going into convolution reverb, because once again, that was the convolution reverb I chose. Going into a frequency shifter. So let's see what that does. Let's start with the raw sample. That's all right. That's better. And then we have some general dynamics. Oh, it's the same little trick with the boost to the tail. To add a little bit of release to the sound. I think this is the only sound I used there. No, I also used the other sounds. I think this is especially the part where the frequency shifter is better noticeable. That sounds pretty mental. I especially like how it fades into the lead sound. Very cool. Very cool sound. That's basically the only two sounds I used from that specific patch. And we also have this little noise thing in the beginning. This is a later addition. I didn't quite know what to add at this point, so I figured, oh, let's add a little noise, because why not? So this is just straight up noise. Nothing interesting. But it did feel like it kind of fitted that aesthetic or something. This makes it a little bit dirtier. And all the little dirty bits help if you add them up. So after I made this little intro thing, I kind of copy pasted it. Changed the drum beat a little bit from being very fast to a more laid back. Basically the same thing. I figured I would have to add another phrase to it because it was getting very much the same thing over and over again. So I figured let's do a little bit of a more aggressive approach for the last little first bit. And at that point I was working on some lyrics which conceptualized the idea of an alien traveling to Earth because we asked for help. He coming here and noticing that humans were just kind of shit. I didn't want to accept help, and he just figured, well, let's just wipe out humanity. So I figured the last verse would be rather aggressive, so I figured let's just add a ton of percussion, because really, honestly, this pack by Loopop, if anything, features a lot of percussion and not that many other sounds, so it's very challenging. Would have lost some extra pads and stuff, but this is the hand we got dealt. This is the hand we worked with. So that's where we add this bit of madness. You might think that sounds pretty damn random. How did you come up with that line? Well, I did nothing. I just used Stokas. Stokas is interesting. It's kind of a generative sequencer thing. Ben Jordan made a decent video about it, showcasing it in a very different use case. Probably more sensible use case, but I figured, well, we have a contact instrument with all sorts of little noises. Why not just run some random MIDI into it and see whatever happens? So I just threw in some random little blips and blobs. MIDI transposers here because I couldn't figure out how to transpose it up in Stokas in a meaningful way, so I just figured let's just put a MIDI transpose in between, transpose it up 2 octaves so it fits into this range, and let's just let it rip. So the neat thing is you can actually record the output of Stokas. That's what I did to make sure it was the same every time, because this is probability based. and I wanted something a little bit more stable to work with, so I just outputted like 2.5 minutes of random chaos and then just cut this little bit out of it, which sounded interesting enough to do the job. Once again, convolution, of course, because reverb is live. I mean, that's just boring. There we go. I figured I could also use this in the outro just to a little bit of spice. So in the outro we get a little bit of this back. So that's our drum bus and all that stuff, and just to add more mayhem to this part, because I really want to pepper in that this is like the big evil let's mess everything up bit. I added these pads. For this I used one of the samples, Loopop Waldorf M6 sample, into Contact. So absolutely nothing going on here because it's just a sample. Going into Crush. Do a little bit of high pass filtering, a little bit of drive, a little bit of crush. Going into vocal doubler by Isotope at a pretty low setting. This is actually an interesting VST to use on things that are not vocals. I mean, it's probably very good on vocals as well, but it's a pretty lovely way to add width to anything, really. So it seemed fitting to just throw it on here. And I believe this is just a lot of pitch modulation. Not the cleanest playing in the world. Gets the job done. So that's basically all the instrument tracks I used here to get to this track, and all the VSTs I used. So if you want to see this, oh, that's the wrong screen. I wanted to grab this one. There we go. If you have a microscope, you can pause and you can see what the hell's going on here. But that's all the tracks. We still need to talk a little bit about Vocoder and these last two little tracks, which are not in use, but we still need to cover them for a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about Vocoder. So this was a little bit controversial. I actually posted an Instagram tweet, Instagram post, story? It's probably a story. Anyways, I posted to Instagram saying, well, technically, you say the voice is allowed, so I should be allowed to use a vocoder, right? Which was approved. So vocoders were allowed, so I was like, all right, that's cool. Not that I know how to write lyrics or actually sing, so kind of made it hard on myself. So these are the scratch vocals. I will change this up because this is basically 3 times the same vocal line, and I will change up the vocal lines within the next not that many days left, which sucks, but I'll get it done. Trust me. Well, I'll get it done because you heard the track at the beginning, right? So this vocoder thing, yes. Let's talk about that. So basically I wanted to stick as close to the kind of competition rules that were set by Loopop. So I figured I want to do this for free as well, because why not? But I also don't want to introduce another instrument. So we had to get a little bit creative. So once again, I did use Melodyne because I'm no singer. That's definitely not my strong suit. So these vocals, we'll get to the raw vocals in a second. They are absolutely terrible. Also because I didn't put any effort into even trying to hit pitch, thinking, well, I will just like vocode it anyway, so why bother? And then I figured I would have to show it in a video, and it was very embarrassing. It's possibly more embarrassing now, but we'll get to that. Anyways, vocals, Melodyne, running into a compressor because vocal dynamics is very annoying to work with, so just squash the hell out of it. And then we go into this amazing little plugin. I think I actually featured this plugin, but it's really good. This is Tel Vocoder by Tel. It's free, and it has a very, 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 very neat feature, and that's this little button here. And this little button here allows you to use a side chain as a carrier for your vocoder. And this is cool because this actually allows me to use a Loopop sound as carrier. So I am not using the Tel vocoder carrier signal, so I'm still using Loopop provided samples as a carrier for my vocoder. Just to keep it in the spirit of the competition, right? This is Hydra synth. No, it's Waldorf 24. Going to distortion, going to compression. That's our carrier signal. Going into the Tel vocoder with the mode selected that it uses the sidechain, using the Reaper very confusing sidechain thing. Here, just going, do I want to show this? It's very annoying. Actually, it's not there. Let me see if I can find it. I recently messed up my Reaper interface, and I really haven't bothered to attempt to fix it, in all fairness. Is there any easy way to show this if you mess up that little button? It's probably here somewhere. Routing matrix, sure. Sure. So we have the vocoder carrier here. Can I open it here? Oh yeah, there we go. So it's going from the vocoder carrier into the vocoder 3 and 4. And that's the Tel thingy. So if I turn off this part, it should not do anything because it needs this signal. There we go. Now, obviously, I didn't have to make it this hard on myself, but I just figured that, well, let's just keep it in spirit of everything. Let's do it this way. So I'm not using the built-in carrier, so I can just demonstrate that by running this sentence. So I can do whatever here. Doesn't matter. Because it's not using these settings at all. For this, I actually found out that there's such a thing as Epic Verb by whoever made this. But it's free. It's actually quite nice. And this is just a double check. The stereo-ness. I also like these little monitors, but I mildly like the analyzers from Ozone more. Ozone Elements, by the way, is quite often free. So it's a little bit of a gray area, I guess. And I'm not actually using it in the final mix. It's just there, bypassed, being a thing. Maximizer and limiter are from Reaper. There's also loudness analyzer. That was mostly to see if I wasn't completely messing things up. And there's also a little compressor here just to catch some peaks. It's at a very high rate. I actually think most of the time the signal is way below that, but it's just to catch little peaks going over with the maximizer and the limiter on, because we want to get maximum loudness. We now get a fair bit of latency. It's the price you pay. Anyways, so that's all the active tracks of this Loopop challenge, and this is already a pretty lengthy video, and I'm going to add more length to this video, because why not? If you're still here, you're probably interested in this anyways. So as I alluded to before, this. It's a little bit of a cheat, right? I mean, technically speaking, it's very basic MIDI, and you could easily write this out or play this out. I just want to highlight this for a second. I already did some videos on XLN audio before, and also on addictive drums and XO. And having MIDI files of drum parts in any capacity, albeit things you download from the internet or whatever, it's very useful, because sometimes you just need a drum beat, and then you can tweak and adjust it. So what I did in this very instance is I took some of these funk beats, and you can just throw these into your DAW, and you can then cut them up. So I copy paste them and cut them up, so I can use them on all these tracks. So as you can see, it also says funk straight beat, height close, funk straight beat, height closed. That's a pre-made little funk beat. And then you can start to tweak it from there on out to fit the song better. That's a little cheat, and I have to admit I often use addictive drums just for this purpose, because it's just very neat not having to write drum tracks every single time. It works. So yeah, laziness, but it does really help with songwriting. If you are struggling to find a start, it's always nice to have a drum groove going, and once you have that drum groove going, you can start on the bass track or whatever your preferred order of operations is. For me as a drummer, it's always nice to just have a groove going and just work from there. So that's why the addictive drums track is still here. It's not doing anything, it's totally empty. There's a single MIDI note in here, but for transparency's sake, I want to keep it here. This little thing was an experiment, because I was planning to do a video eventually for this track, and I figured how fun would it be if I could actually play some of the bass parts on my bass guitar, but use the Loopop samples, and that would be cool, right? And stuff like that. And didn't quite work, but I still want to shortly talk about it, because it's an interesting concept, and maybe I'll get it to work. So essentially, MTuner, which is also free, I believe, has a MIDI output option, and if you input something, so this is probably the part where I should have set something up. Let me quickly grab my bass. I'm actually not going to bother cutting this out as well. Why would I? Video is already an hour long. Might as well keep it in. Ooh, that's a lot of noise. So let's bypass, bypass, bypass. There we go. Let's use a higher note because my bass is a little bit wobbly. And the down tuned, I still need to fix that. Anyways, what you can do now is you can enable the MIDI output, and if I were to load in Contact, for instance, so Contact, sure. It's a little bit trigger happy. Oh, it's probably Kate messing up the. So that was the initial plan, to route it like that. We need to tweak the threshold and the range a little bit, and I found it very useful to have a gate before the tuner. So you essentially need to use some sort of gate before the tuner, and it's a little bit fiddly, and in the end it simply didn't seem worth experimenting with. But I just want to pass on this idea, so if anyone ever wants to try this kind of audio to MIDI thing, you can check out mTuner and give it a whirl, see if it works for you. So this was my TED talk about the Loopop contest Superbooth 2021, covering all the individual tracks, instruments, plugins. It's everything, I think. I've covered pretty much everything. Some of these plugins will get some in-depth videos very, very soon. But if there are any questions about anything in this freaking long video, feel free to ask, because I'd like to know. And if you're still here, you're an absolute trooper, because I've been rambling for way too long. Anyways, that's it for now. I hope you're enjoying the competition and you're having fun with the Loopop pack. And of course, a special thanks to Mr. Loopop himself for providing these fun little samples to play around with. That's it. Have a great day.